Back in the day, my parents didn't really have the money to buy me the dress I wanted to wear to homecoming, so I decided to get me a job as a babysitter in order to pay for it myself. It was a bit of a dicey thing to try and do, I suppose. I mean, nowadays people are understandably cautious about having other people not only in their home, but also watching their children. I actually had to take to showing his parents my report cards and giving them recommendations from my teachers as well. I can understand it, especially after hearing all the horror stories out there. But understanding didn't make it any less frustrating. When I did finally land a job though, the people I found it with were very much the complete opposite of the parents I'd normally get. I had brought copies of my cards, all my recommendations, but they seemed genuinely surprised when I offered them up. Even more surprised than I was that they didn't ask for them. They almost seemed like they were trying to cover up for not asking and feigned interest in seeing them after. I got the job pretty quickly. It was great too, because it was a standing Friday job and paid extremely well. Because I'd gotten the job so easily, I automatically thought those kids must be real terrors or something. My own parents were fairly strict, but I know a lot of parents don't know how to raise their children right, and they become little terrors. Trust me, I've seen it happen many times. I was pretty nervous on my first night there. I was very pleasantly surprised to find the kids were absolute angels, possibly the most well-behaved kids I'd ever seen in my whole life. I was a bit confused then about why the parents had been like that. I wrote it off as maybe they were just more trusting than most others I'd interviewed with. A few weeks after I'd been initially hired, my friend Jody asked me if I wanted to go to a movie with her on a Friday night. I let her know I wouldn't be able to because I had that babysitting job. She often babysat too and asked me lots of questions about what the family was like, how well behaved the kids were, and of course what the job paid. As we were talking, I mentioned the name of the family I was sitting for, and Jody turned white as a sheet. For a girl who spent several nights a week in the tanning booth, this was saying quite a lot. She confirmed the address of the house I was working in, and she shook her head at me, telling me I sure was brave. When I asked her to explain what she meant, she told me the house was a bit of a hot potato in the neighborhood. In her own life, she'd seen over 6 families move in and out of it, and that was only when she was old enough to begin paying attention. She told me the reason why was because there was a family back in the 1960s that had owned the house. Supposedly, they had a 10-year-old girl who they kept locked up in their shed in the backyard. She didn't go to school, didn't have any friends, they just left her out there in her own filth. She died of malnutrition at the age of 10. Let me be clear, I did not believe her story, and I don't believe it now either. To me, it was just one of those far-fetched urban legends people tell each other. Through the grapevine, they get more and more outrageous over time. Although I didn't believe that particular story, I did become a bit nervous about the house though. I never brought this urban legend up to the parents because I really loved the job and didn't want to lose it by being weird. A couple weeks after Jody told me that story, I was babysitting that Friday night. You know, typical scary story setting, a babysitter on a dark and stormy night. Well, that was what was happening. I had put the kids to bed earlier, and it was about 10 p.m. The parents were out very late, and I didn't expect them to return home until close to 2. I was in the upstairs den watching The Daily Show when a large boom of thunder shook the house. As expected, soon after, the 8-year-old daughter rushed into the den. "Aw, honey, are you scared of the thunder?" I asked her when she ran up to me. The girl, Ellen, shook her head though. She said something I couldn't quite understand. When I asked her to repeat herself, I regretted it immediately. "No, I'm scared of the girl in the backyard." Of course, I was immediately alarmed. I asked her what she was talking about. She told me to come with her, and she'd show me. I kept hoping to myself that she'd just had a bad dream or something. I was nervous as she led me to her room. She then told me to look out into the backyard. I was scared, of course, but I was the babysitter. This was the very essence of my job, to protect the children. I crept up to the window and peeked out. Of course, there was nothing there. Turning back to Ellen, I began to ask her if she was sure she didn't just have a bad dream. Before she could answer though, I saw something out of the very corner of my eye. My head snapped back to the backyard, and I'll never forget what I saw that night. I saw a girl wearing nothing but a nightgown, crawling across the yard and flopping in the mud. She crawled over to the shed, turned, looked up at the window, nudged the shed door open, went inside and disappeared. Terrified, I rushed the children into the den and called the police and the parents. They all came out immediately. The police searched the yard and the shed too. They didn't find the girl. However, they did find mud on the door of the shed and strewn about the floor, as if it had been tracked in recently, so surely someone was in there. I didn't believe in ghosts then, and I still don't honestly to this day. I think it must have been a prank set up by my friend Jody, or perhaps a homeless person or something. She denies any involvement and seemed genuinely terrified when I told her the story. None of the parents nor the police claim to have ever heard the urban legend when I told it to them, so I don't even think that's a real story in the first place. The fact is, I don't know what it was I saw that night. I have no explanation. Even if I did, it was scary as hell when it happened. When I was 17, I babysat for a house right on the outside of town. It wasn't a rural setting, one of those homes that's not on a block in a neighborhood though. It was set just off a local highway and was at the end of a good 50 yards or so driveway. The father of the family worked in pharmaceuticals and was really well off. We used to always joke he was only able to buy the house because he made so much drug money. 3 years earlier, my parents drove me over until I was 16. At that point, I got a car. Fortunately, I had a lot of babysitting money from that job I had been saving up, specifically to grab one. I really enjoyed this job, which I guess is quite obvious, since I'd been with them for many years. I'd never run into any serious problems there. At worst, the kids would pick a few little fights with each other or things like that. During a Saturday night in the spring when I was 17 though, something very odd happened. It was raining and storming pretty hard, and I had put the youngest kids to bed already. The oldest boy, Bobby, was 13, and he was allowed to remain up a bit later. I had been watching television while Bobby was in the other room playing video games. I was startled when I suddenly heard a knock at the door. I got up, wondering who in the world would be there this late at night during a heavy storm. I went over to the door and peeked through the glass window on it. I saw a random man standing there. A car running with its lights on was right behind him. The man was dressed in all black and a heavy trench coat. With the lights of his car shining behind him, I could barely see any of his features. I asked the man if I could help him through the door. I clearly had no desire to open it up. He simply asked me if someone named Charlotte was there. Well, no one named Charlotte lived in this house, so I told him the truth. "Oh, sorry, wrong house." He walked over to his car, hopped in, and drove slowly away. It was weird, but I didn't really think that much about it. I went back and started watching TV again. Nearly 45 minutes later, though, Bobby was looking out the front window when he noticed there was a car pulling into the driveway. I got up and went to take a peek. It parked with the lights shining up at the house, and a man in a black trench coat walked right up to the door and knocked on it. When I asked who it was, the exact same exchange happened as before. The man asked me if a Charlotte was home. I told him he'd already been here and asked me that question before. I told him no one named that lived here. "Sorry, wrong house again. Look, can you help me out here and help me figure out these directions? I seem to be very lost." I declined, telling him no offense, but I didn't want to open the door for a strange man. He asked again and tried being persistent for a little while, but eventually got the picture I was not going to open the door. He hopped into his car and slowly drove away again. I looked over at Bobby and commented about how weird it was. He looked absolutely terrified though. I asked him what was wrong. He just told me not to answer the door if the guy came back and to call the police right away. The guy didn't come back. When Bobby's parents got home, I told them about what had happened. and I asked why Bobby had been so scared. They told me that before they met me, they had a babysitter named Blair who used to work for them. Blair had disappeared one night while she was babysitting the kids. Apparently, someone had pulled into the driveway. They had security cameras set up outside. Not surprising, as I mentioned, these people have a lot of money. A man, seen wearing a trench coat, walked out and asked if Charlotte was there. Apparently, he had asked Blair to come out and help him with directions because he said he was lost. Blair did this, and the two of them walked out of view of the camera. And that was the last time anyone ever saw her. I don't know why a person who abducted a teenage girl would ever come back to the same house. That seems incredibly stupid to me. Bobby's father figured it must have been vanity or something. He was successful once in a rich person's house and wanted to try once again. I really have no idea though. All I can tell you is I'm very thankful I did not decide to open that door. I used to babysit for this woman who, honestly, I always felt should have spent more time with her kids rather than hiring a babysitter. She had 3 children in all, 2 young boys and 1 girl, all with her ex-husband. The very fact that she was the one who got custody of them told me that no matter how bad she was, the husband had to be much worse. Just to be clear, by bad I don't mean she abused her kids in any way, because I never noticed any signs of that. She seemed to love them a lot, actually. She was just absent all the time. She would go out partying and drinking and come home all liquored up. Often, she wouldn't even come home at all and would sleep the night somewhere else, I suppose at one of her boyfriend's houses. My friends all wondered why I kept this job, but to me, it was pretty obvious. First, she paid me really well for what I did. Plus, it was already bad enough. The kids didn't have their mother or their father around them. I didn't want to abandon them also. They were really good kids. This story happened on one of the nights when the mom was out partying, and I knew it was going to be an all-nighter. At about 6 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. Going to it, I recognized the man who was there as their father. I'd never met the man myself, but I'd seen several pictures of him so I could be aware if he ever came over. He was not allowed to see the children without some sort of supervision from the courts. The man asked me if he could come in and see his children, which of course I declined. When he asked me where the mother was, I told him that wasn't his business, and I was simply their babysitter. He kept on trying to convince me to let him in, and I kept on declining. He even tried telling me he must be a better parent than her, because at least he was trying to see his children while she was still out partying. I reminded him, though, that wasn't any of my business. Eventually, he gave up and left. I wasn't really too concerned, but I tried to get in touch with their mother anyway, just in case. Not too surprisingly, her cell phone went straight to voicemail, though. I tried not to think about it too much longer, and put it out of my mind for the moment. Normally, I would have put the kids to bed around 8:30 or so, but half an hour before then, a big storm rolled in. The kids were scared of the thunder, so I let them stay up and watch TV with me. The hub was doing a My Little Pony Friendship is Magic marathon, so we watched that together. At about 9 p.m., I saw car lights pull up in the driveway. At first, I assumed it was miraculously the mother getting home earlier. Maybe her date had flaked out on her or something. That theory was immediately dispelled when the window beside the door busted in. The kids screamed and got up and ran to the far end of the room. Looking at the door, I could see a man holding a tire iron, which he must have used to smash the window. The window wasn't big enough for him to get inside, so he reached around and tried to grab the doorknob. I had to decide quickly whether to call the police or to try to keep him from getting inside. Thankfully, the oldest girl was smart enough to run for the phone and dialed the police for me. This meant I had to deal with the outraged father. The man was yelling all sorts of obscenities at me, screaming and calling me slurs, that if I didn't let him see his kids, he was going to gut me in front of them and worse. Of course, anyone with sanity would know that was not a winning argument. Thank God this house had a fireplace, because there I found a poker. I grabbed the poker, ran to the door, and slammed it down on the man's hand. Fortunately for me, it hurt him bad enough to pull his hand out immediately. He began to scream. Unfortunately, the poker was an old piece of crap and broke in half as soon as I hit him. In the storm, there could have been no way he would have seen that though. While the man was still cursing at me, I heard police sirens begin in between the thunder. He must have heard them too, because he took off running. He got into his car and left. The cops came to the house and pursued the father. They found his car parked outside of a bar. He went drinking after I fought him off. Needless to say, he was swiftly arrested. The police had a long talk with the mother as well, although I'm not really privy as to what that talk was about. Unfortunately, the family ended up moving, so I was not able to babysit those sweet children again. They gave me big hugs and told me they loved me before they moved though. That meant the world to me. I did see the mother again because I had to testify in a hearing, but the father, luckily, that horrid bastard, ended up going to jail for a while. This all started about a month ago when a man started banging on my door at 6 o'clock at night, yelling for a mic to come out and see him, that he needed to get his cigarettes from the man. I told him he had the wrong house and to leave. There had never been a Mike that lived in this house. The man got even more aggressive, calling me a liar and how he was going to come in and beat that skinny bitch I lived with. I tried to call the non-emergency police line because I'd never called 911 before. They didn't even pick up. Looking back, it seems kinda stupid, but it was instinct. After some more shouting, he eventually left. I called my father, who was across town, to come home and told him what was going on. He showed up soon after. He called 911 to file a report. The man came back though and started screaming at my father as well. The cops were called again and showed up an hour after the call. They couldn't find the man and told me to simply defend myself if it came to it. After that, I ended up staying with a friend for the night because I didn't feel safe at home. I can be a strong person, but I don't think I can do much against a drugged-out monster. What made the situation even scarier to me is that while I was going through my driveway camera photos to check after, it showed him walking up to my house hours before and circling around it, and I had no clue. I had really bad anxiety, so the next few days were filled with paranoia and stress. Finally, I managed to calm down somewhat and convince myself that would simply be the end of it. Come that weekend, my father went on a trip with his girlfriend, so I was left alone for a couple of days. I had just put on a scary movie when I heard screaming again and a loud bang. I pulled up my camera to see the man was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk and had thrown over our trash can, again screaming for this mic. I called 911. They showed up within minutes this time and were able to stop him down the street. They told me there was nothing they could do though, since he hadn't committed a crime yet. If he came back, to call again, and then they'll have more reason to hold him. Things were quiet for a few weeks after, and again, I believed that would be the end of it. That was until today. This morning, my father and I got into an argument, so I wanted to take a walk to clear my mind. I went across the street to a park and sat by a tree watching cars pass by every now and then. A beautiful morning with beautiful weather. All of a sudden though, I noticed a truck slowly drive down the left side of the park and turn to the street my back was facing. The man inside waved as he passed by, so I did too, thinking it must be a man going to work or something. He pulled off onto the right side of the park, stopped, and made a U-turn to come back. Red flags instantly went off in my head, so I got up to start leaving. I looked back only to see the person had turned off their headlights and was now trailing me. I got to the front of my house and he slowed down. I got a better look at his face this time, and it looked just like the man who had been harassing me. From the physical characteristics to his signature baseball cap, he glared at me like I'd taken everything in his life away from him. I got to the door and tried to barge in. My father put the chain on in anger of me walking out, but I had to scream at him that I was being followed and to open the door. He opened it quickly, but by then the truck had shot down the street. I'm terrified to leave my own home. I don't have a car to get anywhere quickly. I have to bike everywhere. Even now though, I'm scared to do that. I don't know who this man is or what his intentions are. When I was 10, my parents and I lived across the street from my grandmother. It was around 8:30 or 9 p.m. It had been dark for about 15 to 20 minutes. I told my mom I was going to quickly run across the street to my grandmother's house. Instead of going across the street though, I walked over to a convenience store about 6 blocks away. On my way back, while devouring my Three Musketeers bar I'd acquired at the store, I came upon an intersection. A car about a block away was going through the intersection as well. Out of nowhere, this person slammed on their brakes, squealed in reverse and whipped their car around, and then started gunning it right at me. At this point, it was pitch black. No one was out, so I took off running for my life. I cut between a house and hopped a fence and started down a random alley. I could see his bright headlights behind me. They seemingly slowed down as he tried to turn into this tight space. I dived down and hid behind 2 trash cans while this fucker creeped by at 2 miles an hour, obviously searching for me. He passed through and pulled out of the alley. I could hear his tires squealing. I was shaking and paralyzed with fear. I waited for 20 or 30 seconds to get my shit together. I stood up and made it less than 20 feet. When I saw his headlights returning to the alley once again, this time I was behind someone's detached garage. Looking around the corner of the garage, I could see the man had now emerged from his vehicle. I couldn't make out his face at all as it was covered. I could see his head was on a swivel, practically breaking his neck searching for me. He pulled back out of the alley after getting back into his car, and I hopped through every person's backyard for 3 blocks until I made it home. The part that sucks as an adult is knowing how dangerous that situation is. I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want to get busted for lying. I feel really bad now though. Someone should have been notified. The authorities definitely should have been looking for this guy.